So as we move into open comment session, I just wanted to remind folks that we're going to use the same ground rules we used for the preceding discussions, and we're not going to talk about just any issue. We need to continue our focus on the patient perspective, on burdens and treatment, and how that influences a patient's life, and how we might look at different ways to capture, measure, and otherwise just get our arms around what's going on with the progression of NPC in patients. So we're not going to talk about Notre Dame football. I'm really sorry, Sean. You find things that people are passionate about beyond NPC, although I understand that it's not just life with NPC. For you all, it's life as NPC. It tends to engulf your entire being. So additional comments on anything related to burdens and treatments and insights that we can offer to regulators and sponsors about just different ways to look at things. If you could measure something differently in how you look at activities of daily living. And it goes back to the question of what tends to stand fairly stable, and is that a good indicator of when something gets suddenly better or suddenly worse? Like with seizures, that's a trigger for additional care needs. Jay? So Colleen's going to bring you the mic. Thank you.
I think it was 2012, we went to the NIH and did this family history, and JP had swallowing issues then. When he drank and ate, he usually coughed and choked, and now he doesn't anymore. And we've been treating him for 6 years. And about a year ago, we thought he was better with that, and we found out with silent aspiration, he just lost the ability to know he's choking, and food's going down the wrong way. So while we thought it was better, it really wasn't. It got worse. So I just want to caution everybody to, be aware that swallowing, while he doesn't choke and cough, it could be they don't realize it anymore.
Great observation. It's so hard to remove oneself and be totally objective at times, so we respect that. Thank you. Ready for next thought? Yes, please.
Thanks. I'm Tony Matheson. I'm representing UK and international patients here today in my roles as Chief Executive of Niemann-Pick UK and also a representative of the International Niemann-Pick Disease Alliance. But most importantly, I'm mum of 3 children who have been lost to Niemann-Pick Type C. I just wanted to highlight a point, actually, that this community is truly global, and the challenges that are faced by all of the people we've heard from today are those faced by patients around the world. And furthermore, clinical trials for Niemann-Pick Type C, by necessity, need to be multinational, and therefore any decisions or direction given by the FDA have a global impact. And that can be on the conduct and design of clinical trials, and also regarding any decision on drug approvals. So I'd just like to thank the FDA for the opportunity to raise this with you today, and to encourage you to consider the global impact of any decisions that are made for all rare diseases, not just Niemann-Pick Type C. Thank you.
Thank you very much. A wonderful and appropriate observation, and thinking about patients holistically, regardless of what their address is so key. And obviously, by expanding the scope of clinical trials, that might conceivably in the future lead to things we were going to talk about in future meetings, we hope, platform trials and other ways, and also to acknowledge that FDA and U.S. manufacturers and others participate in groups called International Conference on Harmonization of Technical Standards. So that's very important. Did you wish to make? Well, thank you, Dr. Roman.
So I just want to stress this point that you have just made, and to point out that actually this is a very important component of the way we look at rare diseases in the division and beyond. And as I mentioned before, there are very few patients in this world, and every patient counts, and every data point counts. And all the rare disease programs are pretty much global. So we communicate routinely with EMA about programs in rare diseases across a whole variety of conditions. And we communicate proactively if we see some programs going in direction that makes us a little bit nervous with respect to how much thoughtfulness has been put in that particular program and how much importance has been given to the chances of success beyond a demonstration of an intermediate effect. And this has been actually very successful in terms of communication on both sides of the ocean. We also have Health Canada and some of these communications, etc. But I think it is a global community. And when you have a disease in which you have 200 patients, I'm not talking about Niemann-Pick C, but in general, if you have a disease with 200 patients in the world, or a disease with 20 patients in the world, as we have sometimes, you can only think about it globally. And I have been involved, when I was in endocrine with approving two drugs in a disease with 200 patients, but it was a very measurable treatment effect, and then made it very easy. So just reassure you that this is reality. And any of my colleagues here participate, who may be in the room, participate in some of these meetings routinely. We have the pediatric cluster with EMA. We have, actually, it's a very, very well organized, and it's conducted by the Rare Disease Office, which is in office above our head, and which is responsible for this activity. I also wanted to mention, because I'm wearing many hats here, as a person, as a physician, as a regulator. So let me just say, as a person who just comes out from outside of community and has to, participates to this meeting, it's a very, very impressive experience, and I'm sure I'm talking for all my colleagues. And I really admire the strength of the community at being together and sharing all these experiences, and everyone sharing their ability to make a difference, no matter how small it is, in the lives of others. And I think it really speaks about the commitment of the community and speaks about the potential of the community. As a physician, you always have to separate yourself from your feelings. I remember the experience when I had my first son, and I was a hospital-based pediatrician, and you have to go to work, and whoever is familiar with neonatal sepsis knows that you have no good test to diagnose it, and you have to do a spinal tap, in some of these cases routinely. And holding an infant with the same characteristics as your own infant is very difficult. But you have to kind of dissociate yourself at some point in order to be able to make a difference. So with that in mind, there are a couple of things that, as a physician, not as a regulator, I think was very important. I think that the idea of a screening process that will allow to identify patients very early, goes back to the concept that was raised about having converting Niemann-Pick C to a chronic disease. You have to identify patients early. You have to be able to intervene early successfully so it can make a big difference. I agree with the idea of, again, as a physician, of the multiple drug treatment, because we know very well that even a successful drug can only do so much. And eventually, sooner or later, we will look at some very complex diseases, very prevalent disease like diabetes. Patients end up on many, many drugs until CBER and my colleagues from CBER will be able to approve a drug that really cures the disease and changes the natural course of the disease. And the other, as a regulator, I just want to say that if I would have been at a scientific meeting or at a industry development meeting, we have been talking about biomarkers. So really, it's uplifting to me that we talk about what's important to patients, and what the symptoms are, or what activities of daily living are important, because I think this is where we need to move all program and all drug development programs, and from all perspectives. And finally, I just hope that all this information gets published, because we already see among the heterogeneity of manifestations, we already see some degree of stratification with some frequent elements, and those elements are very important when you have conversation with drug developers, or when drug developers come to us and have conversations with us about how to design a trial, how to select an endpoint, what kind of patient population, what kind of ages, what kind of patient characteristics should be included in the trial. So those relatively simple hierarchies can have a big impact in the future. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you very much. Well, very important comments, and I know that our colleagues have been listening, but also hearing that validation of what you have shared and the value of that and how we can further translate it is very important. So thank you very much, Dr. Roman. And also take the opportunity to thank our colleagues from NIH. I believe Dr. Porter is here, and we thank them. Patient-focused drug development is something that goes from bench all the way to the bedside, and so assuring that we have continuous involvement of the best minds and all of your minds is very important. So we're going to capture those things that we just heard about the importance of screening, understanding changes in natural history, and I'm glad Dr. Roman brought up the notion of biomarkers, which we really didn't talk about a lot, and something that's complementary, which is intermediate clinical outcomes, something described in several of the FDA guidances that help us look at, so if seizures are going to occur, is there some predictor of that clinically or in blood tests or other kind of tests, all very important. But we don't want to hear me talk, we want to hear you talk, so please.
Hi, so I'm Thomas Blettler. I'm the Chief Medical Officer of Orphazyme. First, I would like really to thank the Parseghian Fund for leading the organization of this meeting. It is tremendously insightful for me to follow your stories, your experience with NPC. I'd like to thank especially Samantha and Alec, who are people living with NPC, for sharing their experience. I'd like to thank all of you parents. What we can tell is NPC does impact the lives of patients, and it impacts the lives of families. NPC is an ultra-rare disease, and as we've heard today, very heterogeneous in its manifestation, or probably mostly with the trajectories. Every patient is an individual person who has an individual trajectory. This means the combination of an ultra-rare disease and a very heterogeneous disease course, this means we have very little information what happens with patients who have disease. So what we need also as a drug developer is data that shows us what can we expect, what is the disease course we can expect in a given person with NPC. And that's where I'd really like also to draw your attention to the INPDR, the International Niemann-Pick Disease Registry. This is an initiative to collect those data. We are a small company, we run small studies. We cannot run big studies. So we need additional data to complement the data that we generate. And that can be done with registries, international registries. Last but not least, I'm a parent of 3 healthy children. I can only try to imagine what you're going through. Listening to you motivates me to get up in the morning and work relentlessly to advance treatment for NPC. Thank you.
Couldn't agree more about the need for information and, in many ways, shared information, which will be very important, which like to address in the summary as well. Yes, thoughts, oh, sorry, please.
That's okay. Yeah, Kathy Hartman, Caden's mom again. Caden was diagnosed, well, he had an enlarged liver when he was born, and the doctor just played it off as, oh, he'll grow into it. And then he was fine until age 5. So yeah, early diagnosis is definitely so important, because if they would have thought something more about his, it was a liver or spleen when you were, I think liver, then he could be like Alec and started his diagnosis at a very, very early age. Instead, he didn't start showing any symptoms until age 5. And then took us 3 years to get his diagnosis at age 8. And we're lucky enough that we got onto compassionate use. We have an IIND, VCU is treating him. But what I hear for over and over and over again from people trying to get on compassionate use is they can't find a hospital willing to treat them. And it infuriates me. And because I went through that, I had to do 5 newscasts, go on the news 5 times, beg somebody to help my son. So it took 5 newscasts, and I hear I'm so happy when I hear all these people now are on compassionate use. I'm like, wow, people are really starting to help people. But I know it's not available overseas some places, and I still hear from newly diagnosed parents who are saying, yes, my child has this, but nobody's willing to treat them. And I know that's a big problem. And then he actually got kicked off the trial at VCU because they found out I was giving him CBD. And then so I went to CHKD and said, can you treat him? You know, he's been receiving treatment for how many years, and he's never deteriorated. And CHKD says, nope, we absolutely refuse to treat him. And I said, well, 5 years ago, I understand, because when I went to them first, because that's our local hospital, they said, well, we never heard of NPC, and we never heard of cyclodextrin. So it's too much of a risk. So no, we won't treat him. So that's when I went to the media, and VCU finally started treating him. But it's so heartbreaking when I hear so many people say nobody will treat, we know this is out there. We know there are treatments available, but people still are not, institutions, universities still aren't willing to take them on.
I recognize that that's a very frustrating issue. How do you get into care? How does one participate in trials? And it goes back to, there are so many different levels of comfort that different institutions have. Yes.
Thank you. My name's Justin Hopkin. My son is Garrett. He has the other form of Niemann-Pick disease, ASMD. I come to you today and came to the meeting on behalf of the National Niemann-Pick Disease Foundation. I'm currently the board chair. I don't know what I can say that hasn't already been said today. I would like to say thank you to the 19 panelists who stepped in front of a big audience, in front of a screen, and put themselves out there in what I'm sure was a very difficult task for you. I guess 20 with Marion also saying hello, which I thought was great. I'd also like to thank everyone who's here in attendance for what's described as an ultra-rare disease. To pack this room and bring so many people together for such an ultra-rare disease, I think really speaks to where the community's at right now and their desperate need for therapies to treat this horrible disease. And we are very fortunate that compassionate use is available for so many of us at this point, but we really need to come together as a community to help push these therapies across the line. And I think the word hope came out so much today, that we just want hope for our kids and for our adults that have this disease. And I think this day does bring hope to see everybody come together, to have FDA here to hear about this urgent need and to be collaborating with us as we move forward with so many trials that are coming close to getting finished, to try and push things across the finish line. I'm going to come away with this day being very hopeful. The last thing I'll comment on is the International Niemann-Pick Disease Registry. And as board chair and as a physician, I think that might be the key task that we have with the National Niemann-Pick Disease Foundation right now. Family services, obviously very important. Patient advocacy, very important. But data is truly critical to trying to develop these therapies. And if we can coalesce this data and create a powerful registry, it's going to be more helpful for scientists, it's going to be more helpful for industry, and it's going to be more helpful for clinicians. And in the end, it's going to help us get effective therapies. And it's a mission we're working on very intently right now, and we appreciate your support with all that. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you. I have a sense that we may have kept you on a mental and physical and emotional treadmill here for the last few hours. And rather than overstating that, if you're comfortable, we can move a few minutes ahead to the summary comments. I don't want to stop discussion, but I think it's been very, yes, please.
Hi, I'm sorry to keep you here even longer. My name is Katie Donahue. I'm one of the regulators at the FDA. Dr. Roman is my boss. And I'm curious, one of the challenges for us as a community is going to be deciding how much uncertainty we're willing to tolerate when it comes to figuring out whether or not a drug works. So one of the questions that I would have for you, and I don't know if there's a different or a better format to do this, but let's imagine there's a new treatment. Nobody here has ever tried it, purely a hypothetical treatment. And because of small trial sizes, there's always going to, and the heterogeneity of the endpoints, there's always going to be a lot of uncertainty in concluding, yes, this drug works or no, it doesn't. There's a lot of gray there in that kind of decision making often with rare diseases. And so I heard that, patients and families are willing to tolerate a lot of risk. I heard that today. I've heard that from a lot of you in other settings. I'm not surprised to hear that. I was surprised to see that about 30% of patients and families were concerned about rare but serious side effects. And I think one of the challenges for us is that rare but serious side effects probably aren't going to show up in your clinical trials because they're so small. So we won't know what those are when it comes time to make a regulatory decision. There's going to be more uncertainty about that for therapies for this community than there would be for therapies for something like asthma or heart disease, where there's thousands of patients in the programs. So that's one bit of uncertainty that nobody can fix, not well-meaning drug developers, not patients and families with the courage to be in trials, and not regulators. That's just, we're going to have to live with it. We won't know. So that's one piece of uncertainty that we won't have any data. It's just there. And then the other piece is, are you willing to accept that if we aren't sure if the drug works? So one question I have is, let's say that about 40% of patients in the treatment arm feel like they're doing better, patients and families feel like they're doing better, their doctors think they're doing better, and 35% of the patients in the placebo arm feel like they're doing better, and their doctors feel like they're doing better. So there's a 5% difference favoring treatment. It's not statistically significant, and we don't really know what the serious side effects might be. And it's about to cost $300,000 because that's what rare disease therapies often cost. And so I guess that's what I'm trying to understand is how big of a difference. Let's say if there's a 90% difference, raise your hand if you would take that treatment. If treatment's 90% better than placebo, would you take that treatment? What if it's 80%? What if it's 60%? What if it's 50% better than the other one? What if it's 3% and we know if you did the trial again, it could be 3% worse? What if it's in that gray zone where it's really hard to tell? It looks like it's 3% better, but as a scientist or as a doctor, we really don't have a lot of confidence that it's doing much.
You still have a couple.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm seeing that, but I want the room to see that too. and to think about that. And just to thank everybody for participating in clinical trials. I hear so much courage, so much determination. We are not going to treat that data lightly when it comes time to look at it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And just with the uncertainties, both in terms of rare serious adverse events and also on degree of response, there's a tremendous future to characterize that with preference studies. That's been done in some other rare diseases. It's not the ultimate answer, but at least helps put some shape around that. So very good. Well, we'll give 2 more final comments, and then we're going to go to the summary. So John, and then Rebecca.
Hi. Well, I don't envy you. I think probably it's true that the people whose children are more affected are likely to have raised their hand in the latter cases. They're willing to take more risks. And that does speak to the importance of coming up with alternative ways of thinking about drug approval, individualized offerings, so that some kids might be able to do it, other kids. I know that it calls for innovation, but that's what we need.
Rebecca has a comment. Final word gets to go to Kayla right here.
When Jonathan started the trial, he was not too many symptoms, and and he was phase 1, so we didn't know what it was going to do to him. We hadn't had any data on it. We didn't know if it was going to kill him. We didn't know. But you know what? I would take that 3% because I have 0% without it. So what do I have, 0 or 3? I'm taking the 3.
I feel like sometimes the design of the trial doesn't always reflect the improvements that are made, and we have to look into things closer. Like I mentioned earlier, Cameron walking sideways when she walked a straight line. And so I feel like we have to look at everything, every aspect of it, and not just certain specific things. These are unique and rare kids. They're all different, and we have to come together and have unique and rare designs.
Thank you.